Single dad dragged a woman out of a car wreck, unaware she was his late wife's sister and a millionaire. The rain fell in sheets over the winding mountain road, the kind of relentless storm that turned the narrow pass outside the small Oregon town into a treacherous stretch of shadow and slick pavement. David Harper gripped the steering wheel tighter, squinting through the windshield as his old pickup truck's wipers struggled to keep up. He had just finished his last delivery for the night, lumber for a hardware store, and was desperate to get home. His son, Eli, only 3 years old, needed his heart medication by 9 p.m. sharp. David had already missed too many deadlines lately, too many unpaid bills piling on the kitchen counter. As the truck rounded a blind curve, David's headlights flashed across something that made his stomach drop. A car, twisted and crumpled against a tree, steam rising from its mangled hood. Without thinking, David slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded slightly before jerking to a halt on the muddy shoulder. He threw open the door and ran, boots splashing through the mud and puddles. "Hello?" he shouted, over the roar of the rain and the hissing engine. "Is anyone there?" The driver's side was smashed in. He rounded the vehicle and found the passenger door ajar, barely hanging on its hinges. Inside, slumped over the center console, was a woman. Blonde hair clung to her cheeks, soaked and streaked with blood from a shallow cut at her temple. Her chest rose and fell, but she was unconscious. Hey, can you hear me?" David leaned in, shaking her gently. Her skin was cold, no response. With adrenaline buzzing through his limbs, he reached under her arms and pulled her from the wreckage. She was light, limp, like a drowned bird. He staggered back to his truck with her in his arms, carefully placing her in the passenger seat and grabbing the emergency blanket from behind the seat. Just as he was reaching for his phone to call for help, the woman stirred. Her head tilted slightly, her lips parting in a hoarse whisper. "Claire." David froze. Her voice, that name. He turned to look at her, and for a moment, everything in the world seemed to hold its breath. She blinked up at him through the rain-streaked glass, dazed but alive, and David felt his heart drop into his stomach. It was not possible. It could not be. The curve of her jaw, the delicate arch of her eyebrows, her nose, even the faint dimple that appeared when her lips moved again. "Claire," she whispered once more, eyes fluttering shut. David stared at her, unmoving, his breath caught in his throat. Because the face he saw, it was the face of his wife. But his wife, Lily, had died 2 years ago, and yet this woman, this stranger, she looked almost identical. Not exactly. Her hair was longer, and her voice had a huskier edge, but the resemblance was undeniable. A shiver ran through him that had nothing to do with the cold. He sat there, soaked to the bone, staring at her while the storm raged on outside. His hands trembled as he finally picked up the phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I have a car accident victim. She is alive but unconscious. We are about 10 miles east of Millridge, just off the main pass. Please send an ambulance." After hanging up, he looked at the woman again. "Claire." "Who are you?" he thought. "And why do you have my wife's eyes?" He did not realize he was still staring until her hand twitched beneath the blanket. His fingers reached instinctively to adjust it, tucking it beneath her chin. The road outside had emptied. The world for a brief moment had narrowed to the tiny cabin of his pickup truck, the steady drip of rain, and the mystery of a woman who should not exist. As red and blue lights began to reflect off the slick pavement in the distance, David could not shake the strange feeling pulsing in his chest. Not just fear, not just confusion. Something deeper, recognition, connection, and the first spark of a truth he could not yet name. David carried the woman gently from the truck to the small guest bed in the corner of his modest home. Rainwater dripped from her coat onto the wooden floor, but he barely noticed. His hands were trembling. She had said her name was Claire. Claire, and yet her face, God, her face looked so much like Emily's. It was like staring into a ghost that refused to fade. Her cheekbones, the curve of her lips, even the faint freckle near her left eyebrow. The resemblance clawed at his chest. Max stood by the kitchen doorway in his dinosaur pajamas, clutching his stuffed bunny, his wide brown eyes locked on Claire. "Mommy?" he whispered. David's heart cracked at the sound. He dropped to one knee beside Max. "Nobody," he said softly, brushing a curl from his son's forehead. "This is Claire. She's just staying here for a little while, okay?" Max blinked, uncertain. He looked at Claire again. She stirred slightly on the bed, her lashes fluttering. "Okay," Max whispered, but his eyes lingered on her. By morning, Claire was sitting at the table, her hair still damp, wearing one of David's old flannel shirts. She looked out the window as if trying to piece the world together. She had no ID, no phone, no memory of where she had been going. Just her first name and a haunted look that seemed to speak of roads too long and burdens too heavy. "I can cook," she said quietly, after a long silence, "to repay you for letting me stay. It's the least I can do." David hesitated. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said. She moved around his kitchen with quiet precision, opening cupboards like she already knew what was inside. David watched her chop onions with practiced ease, crack eggs into a bowl like she had done it 1,000 times. The smell that soon filled the kitchen hit him like a punch to the gut. He knew that smell. Scrambled eggs with chives, toast with a hint of garlic butter. It was Emily's favorite breakfast, one she had made every Sunday morning. Max ran in, drawn by the scent. He climbed onto his chair and kicked his little legs under the table. Claire placed a plate in front of him, smiling gently. "Eat up, sweetheart," Max beamed. "Thank you, Mommy." Claire froze. David held his breath. Then she sat down beside the boy, her smile faltering but not disappearing. "You're welcome, Max." Later that night, Max had a nightmare. David rushed in to find the boy sobbing, clutching his chest. Claire was already there, kneeling beside the bed, wrapping Max in her arms and whispering, "It's okay, baby. I'm here. I'm here." "Don't go," Max cried. "Please, Mommy, don't go." Claire looked up at David then, her eyes wide and wet. She rocked Max gently, smoothing his hair, and whispered the same words again. "I'm here. I promise." David stood frozen at the door, the past and present tangled around his throat. In the dim nightlight, Claire's face looked like a memory he had never truly let go of. He turned away before the tears came. The next morning, Claire sat by the window again, Max asleep in her lap. Her hand rested on the boy's back protectively, and her face carried the softness of someone who had found something she never knew she needed. "I should leave soon," she said when David entered the room. "You can stay," he replied too quickly. Then, more carefully, "at least until we figure out where you belong." Claire looked down at Max. "I think part of me already knows." It had been 2 weeks since the accident, and Claire had not left, not really. She went with David to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, to pick up Max's medication, even to the town diner, where she insisted on helping with breakfast prep in exchange for fresh eggs. But every evening she returned with them to the little house on the edge of the hills, and every morning she woke with Max curled into her side, as if he had known her his whole life. David watched this slow, blooming connection with a strange ache in his chest. He had stopped correcting Max when the boy called her Mommy. Claire never encouraged it, but she did not reject it either. There was something in the way she looked at Max, protective, tender, that made David's chest tighten. And then there was her laugh. It had happened one afternoon when Max spilled juice on her lap and burst into tears. Claire scooped him up, spinning him in the air as she laughed, a sound so full of life and light that David had to look away. Emily had laughed like that, not all the time, but enough for the memory to echo now, uninvited. At night, David sat on the porch while Claire cleaned up inside. He would light a cigarette he rarely smoked, stare at the stars he could barely see through the trees, and tell himself this was temporary, just a woman in need, a child who had filled a hole too big to speak of. But it was not that simple anymore. The way Claire smiled when Max brought her wildflowers. The way she made soup when David coughed once too many times. The way she tucked a blanket around him when he dozed off on the couch after work. These were not the gestures of a guest. They were the quiet rituals of someone who had always belonged. One evening at the grocery store, it happened. Claire was near the produce section when a man approached her. Tall, well-dressed, European. David hung back instinctively. They spoke briefly, Claire startled, then guarded, but what struck David was the language, French, fluid and precise. She turned away quickly, brushing past the man with a cool nod and returning to David with apples in hand and a faint smile on her lips. He said nothing on the drive home, but something shifted. Later that night, he could not sleep. Max was out cold in Claire's lap, both of them curled up on the couch. Claire's hand rested lightly on Max's back, her chin tilted toward her chest. Her breath was steady, calm. David walked past them into his bedroom. He opened the drawer of his nightstand and pulled out the old photo album he had not touched in a year. He flipped to the picture he always stopped at. Emily in the kitchen, holding Max when he was just a baby. Her blonde hair was pulled back. She wore a pale blue sundress. Her smile was wide and real. He looked back into the living room. Claire shifted in her sleep, her head now resting on Max's shoulder. David brought the photo to the doorway and held it up, his hands trembling. The resemblance was uncanny. It was not just the face. It was the way she tilted her head when she listened, the way her nose crinkled when she smiled. He lowered the photo slowly. The air felt heavier. David walked back to the kitchen table and sat down, the photo resting before him. "Who are you really, Claire? And why does my heart ache when you are near?" The evening was quiet, the kind of stillness that settled only after a long day and an early snowfall. Inside the house, the fire crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the living room. Max had finally fallen asleep, tucked under a blanket on the couch with his stuffed elephant clutched in one small hand. David sat at the kitchen table, a framed photo in his hand. Claire entered quietly, drying her hands on a towel. She paused when she saw him, sensing the weight in the air. "Claire," David said, his voice low. "There's something I need to show you." She walked over slowly. He turned the photo toward her. In the picture, a smiling blonde woman held a baby in her arms. Her eyes sparkled. Her face was serene. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the image, her hand trembling as she reached for it. "Emily," David said, "that was my wife. She passed away 2 years ago." "This was taken not long before Max was born." Claire's knees gave slightly, and she sank into the chair across from him. She has my face," Claire whispered. "But not just that. The shape of her hands, the way she smiles." David's brow furrowed. "I know. You look exactly like her. That's part of why I've been so conflicted." Claire looked up, eyes wide. "Her name was Emily?" David nodded. Claire's fingers tightened around the frame. "My name is Claire Dupont," she said softly. "I grew up in Paris. I was adopted by a French couple when I was 6, but I was not born there." David leaned in, confused. "I always remembered flashes," she continued. "A playground, a house with yellow curtains, a girl who looked just like me, my sister. We were twins. I got lost one afternoon in a crowded market. I never saw her again." She swallowed hard, tears filling her eyes. "They told me there were no records, that maybe I imagined her. But I never forgot. That's why I came back. I needed to know if she was real. I needed to find her." David stared at her, his heart thudding in his chest. "She was real," he said, his voice cracking. "And she was everything." Claire's tears fell freely now. "And now she's gone," she whispered. "And Her voice broke. "I fell in love with her husband." David looked away, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth. "I did not know. I swear to you, David, I would never have let this happen if I had known." David stood slowly, crossing to the window. Snowflakes drifted outside, silent and white. "I believe you," he said finally, "but I don't know what to do with any of this." Claire stood as well, gathering her coat. "I should go," she said, barely above a whisper. This is too much. Claire—" He turned, but she was already at the door. She paused, her voice trembling. "For a moment, I thought I found a family. I thought maybe I belonged somewhere." And then she was gone, the door clicking softly behind her. David stood in the silence, holding the photo, his world spinning. He had not just lost Emily once, he had just lost her again. Claire slipped out just before dawn, the morning light barely brushing the edges of the curtains in the small house they had come to call home. The night was silent except for her quiet footsteps as she gathered a few belongings: an old pair of shoes, a sweater, a picture of Max smiling in her arms. She paused at the coffee table, heart pounding, and laid down a note in neat but shaking handwriting. "David, I love you and I love Max. I came searching for family and I found both of you, but I cannot stay. I cannot take the place of Emily. She was your wife, his mother, and the foundation you built. I thought I could help you heal, but now I fear I will break everything instead. Please forgive me and forgive yourself. Always, Claire." She folded the note, placed it on the table, took one last look at the sleeping shapes of father and son, and quietly left through the back door. The early morning mist swallowed her silhouette as she walked away. Inside, Max stirred, shifting his stuffed elephant in his arms. He woke fully and blinked in confusion. "Daddy? Mommy!" David snapped awake in bed, heart thundering, and rushed into the living room. Max sat on the couch, tears welling in his eyes. Beside him lay the note, folded like a fragile promise broken. David swept Max into his arms. "It is okay," he whispered, though his own voice cracked. She had to go. But she loves you. She cares about you so much." Max began to cry, the boy's tears soaking into David's shirt. "I want Mommy," he sobbed. David rocked him, feeling an ache deeper than any he had known. Claire had become their world, and now she was gone. He looked at the note, the promise of love and the pain of departure etched in every carefully chosen word. In the emptiness that followed, David realized he had one more task he could not ignore. With trembling hands, he dialed Dr. Green. "This is David Walker. I need Max's test results." A pause, then a voice. "His results are in. He has a rare genetic condition. There is one full match for a bone marrow transplant." David held his breath. "Who?" "Someone named Claire Walker. She agreed to be tested, but we are missing her contact details." The name rattled through him like thunder. Claire Walker. Their Claire. He hung up and moved with purpose. He scooped Max into his arms again and carried him to the truck in the dim garage. Rain had begun to fall. He buckled Max into his car seat with shaking fingers and sat behind the wheel, his heart pounding. He drove through the silent streets, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. He searched everywhere she might be. Claire's cafe, the community center, the overlook where they had shared hot chocolate and conversation, but everywhere he found only emptiness. Finally, he reached the highway and slowed under a lone street lamp on the old bridge overlooking the river. His phone buzzed. He glanced down. The screen displayed one text: "Meet me at the old bridge, I understand." He didn't reply. He parked a few yards away, engine idling, and stepped out into the cold night air. The rain felt like sympathy on his skin as he walked toward the dim light. Under the street lamp, he saw her, Claire Walker, her blonde hair damp around her shoulders, eyes red-rimmed. She stood by the railing, her frame small against the broad sky. "David," she whispered, and her voice cracked. He closed the distance, holding Max gently in his arms. Without a word, he handed Max to her. The boy wrapped his arms around Claire's neck, eyes wide and searching. "She needs me," Claire said, voice trembling. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she looked up at David. "I thought leaving would protect you and him from my guilt, from my mistakes. But he needs me, and my heart broke every mile without him." David's eyes glistened in the lamplight. "He does, and so do I." Claire looked at Max, who pressed closer into her, seeking comfort. She closed her eyes and leaned into David. "I love him, and I still love you." David's knees threatened to buckle with the depth of feeling rising in him. He looked at her and said softly, "You are not replacing Emily. You are giving him life. You are part of our family now." She reached out, brushing her hand across his cheek, rain mixed with tears. "I'm sorry, David. I thought running away was right." David pulled her and Max into his arms. The three of them huddled under the street lamp. The rain fell around them like a benediction, soft and full of promise. He whispered into her hair, "Welcome home, Claire." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with relief and love. "I'm not leaving again, and we're not letting you," he said, voice certain. They stood together in the rain, a family reformed under a forgiving sky, bound by love, sacrifice, and the promise of a second chance. Claire stood by the window of the hospital room, her arms folded tightly around herself, watching the drizzle trace faint paths down the glass. Max slept in the small hospital bed behind her, his tiny body hooked up to a monitor that beeped with rhythmic certainty. The procedure had gone well, but the recovery was a waiting game. A hard one. David entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "Chamomile," he said, offering her one. "The nurse said it helps with nerves." Claire took it, her hands brushing his. "Merci," he smiled faintly. "You've been teaching Max more French. I heard him count to 10 this morning." Claire's lips curved. "He is very proud of that, you know. He said he's going to count in French and make the nurses fall in love with him." David chuckled. "He might succeed. He already has the dimples." They sat down beside each other, silence stretching between them, but no longer uncomfortable. Since Claire's return, the walls had started to crumble. She had not only agreed to the transplant, she had also insisted on covering every cent of the cost, wiring money before the doctors could even finish their explanation. "I could not leave him," she had said when David asked, "not after seeing how much he needed me, how much I needed him." The weeks of Mac's treatment had created a new rhythm. Claire came by each day, reading to him, brushing his hair back from his forehead, singing lullabies in French and English. She brought meals David had long forgotten how to cook, recreated his late wife's recipes with small twists that somehow made them feel new. One night, after Max had finally drifted into a deep sleep, Claire stayed longer than usual. They stood in the kitchen, their hands bumping occasionally as they washed and dried dishes. David watched her carefully. "You've brought life back into this house." Claire looked down. "Sometimes I worry it is only because I look like her that I make him feel close to his mother again." David set the dish aside and turned to her. "It is more than that." Still, something in her eyes remained distant, guarded. Later that evening, Claire stepped out onto the back porch. David followed. The sky was clear, stars faintly visible through the soft Oregon night. She held a small photo in her hands, the picture of Emily David had once shown her. "She had my eyes," Claire said softly, "but hers were always stronger, braver. I was the quiet one, the dreamer." David stepped closer. "I do not know what she was like at 6 years old, Claire. I only know the woman I married, and I only know the woman standing in front of me now." Claire turned, her expression unreadable. "Do you love me, David?" His breath caught. "Yes." She hesitated. "Do you love me because I look like her, or because I am me?" David reached out and took her hand, pressing it to his chest where his heart beat steady and sure. "I love you because you are Claire, not a reflection, not a shadow. You came into my life when I had forgotten how to feel anything but grief. You brought kindness, warmth, and laughter back into this house. You healed us, not because of who you reminded us of, but because of who you are." Claire's throat tightened. I needed to hear that. He pulled her into his arms, gently. And I needed to say it. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other, the sound of the wind rustling the trees around them. Somewhere inside, Max murmured in his sleep. As the moon climbed higher into the sky, Claire looked up at David. "I have always been searching for home," she said. "I think I have finally found it." David kissed her forehead. "Then stay. Build it with us." She nodded, the final pieces of fear melting away. In the quiet night, their future felt closer, warmer, more possible than ever before. The soft crash of waves against the Oregon shore provided the perfect symphony to the late afternoon breeze. Lanterns swayed from driftwood posts, and picnic tables were covered with white cloths and wildflowers. Friends and neighbors from the small town gathered along the beach, barefoot in the sand, laughter echoing between toasts and music. It was a celebration, not of a holiday or a milestone marked on the calendar, but of something far more precious. Max, now weeks into his recovery, ran in circles near the water's edge, squealing with joy as a flock of seagulls scattered into the air. His cheeks were pink, eyes bright. Life had returned to his small body and to his world. Claire stood a few paces back, watching him. She wore a simple white dress that danced around her knees in the wind. Her long blonde hair was loosely braided, the same way she used to wear it as a child. In her hands was a wooden tray of small berry tarts, her signature dessert, the very one she had made the first night David had asked her to cook in his home. That night felt like a lifetime ago. David approached her from behind, his hand gently grazing her back. "He has not stopped smiling all day," he said. Claire smiled. "Neither have I." "Good," David replied softly, "because I have something to ask you." Claire turned, surprised by the sudden seriousness in his tone. David pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box. Around them, the sounds of the party dimmed, as if the world knew to pause and listen. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring, the inside engraved with 3 names. Max, Claire, David. Claire's breath hitched. "I know we can never replace what was lost," David began, his voice steady, though emotion lingered just beneath the surface. "Emily will always be part of me, part of Max. But life has given us a second chance, a chance to build something new, not in her shadow, but with her memory blessing us. Claire, you are not just a part of our story. You have become the heart of it. Will you marry me?" Silence settled over the beach for a heartbeat. Claire's eyes shimmered as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes!" Cheers erupted from the crowd. Max, catching on, ran toward them with sandy feet and wrapped his arms around both their legs. "Are we getting married?" he asked, grinning. David laughed and scooped him up. "We are." Claire pressed her lips to Max's forehead and then to David's cheek and finally to his lips as the crowd clapped and hollered with joy. Later that evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in shades of fire and lavender, David stood near the bonfire, speaking to the gathered guests. "This town," he said, "gave me support when I lost everything. And this woman," he looked at Claire, "gave me the courage to live again." He paused. "Tonight, I want to announce something quietly. Starting this fall, we are establishing a scholarship fund in 2 names. Emily Caldwell, who gave me the greatest gift of my life, and Claire Beaumont, who saved him." There were gasps, followed by tears and applause. David did not say more. He did not have to. Claire looked at him from across the firelight, her hand pressed to her chest. The gesture was quiet, private. "Thank you." As the night wore on, music returned. Children danced, older couples swayed. David and Claire took to the sand for a slow waltz, with Max perched on David's feet, giggling. "Do you think she's watching?" Claire asked, her head resting on David's shoulder. "I know she is," David said, "and I think she's smiling." Claire closed her eyes, letting the wind carry away the last threads of doubt. For the first time, the future felt wide open and entirely hers. They had not replaced Emily. They had honored her. And in doing so, they had found their way forward, hand in hand, with a little boy in between, and a love reborn from grief, grounded in truth, and lit by the stars above the sea. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting golden light across the modest kitchen. The smell of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls filled the air, mingling with the aroma of scrambled eggs and warm toast. Claire stood by the stove, humming softly, her blonde hair twisted into a loose bun. On the kitchen table sat Max's lunchbox, packed neatly with carrot sticks, apple slices, and his favorite peanut butter sandwich, cut into a perfect heart. Max bounded into the room with the boundless energy only a 4-year-old could possess, his backpack slightly crooked on his shoulders. "Mommy, are we late?" he asked, grabbing a roll from the counter. Claire smiled and knelt to fix the zipper on his coat. "Not if we leave now, sweetheart. Go get your shoes." Max darted away, leaving behind a trail of giggles. David leaned against the doorway, still in his flannel shirt and jeans, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He watched the scene unfold with a quiet, contented awe. For a moment, he was completely still, soaking it in, the light, the smell, the sound of life returning to the house. "I could get used to mornings like this," he said. Claire turned to him, her face glowing in the light. "You already have." He walked over and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You know, she used to make cinnamon rolls just like these." Claire nodded. "I know. But they never smelled this good," he added with a grin. Claire laughed, soft and genuine, then lowered her eyes, touched by the mention of her sister. "She would have loved you," David said gently. "And she would be proud." Claire's gaze met his. "Sometimes I wonder if she sent me here." "Maybe she did," he whispered. "Maybe love does not die. Maybe it waits for the right time, the right place, the right people." The front door slammed, followed by Max's shout. "Shoes are on, let's go!" Claire chuckled and reached for her keys. David stopped her, held her hand for just a moment longer. "Claire," he said, "I need you to hear this. Love is not about replacing someone. It is about carrying them with us while building something new. You are not her shadow." He took a deep breath, emotion tightening his voice. "You are the new light in my life." Claire's eyes welled with tears, but they did not fall. She squeezed his hand, then smiled. "Come on," she said, brushing a kiss against his cheek. "Our little guy's got a future to chase." As they stepped out into the morning sun, hand in hand, Max skipping ahead, the words lingered in the air like a quiet prayer. Love does not replace the past, it redeems it. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of love, loss, and healing. If this story touched your heart, do not forget to like, comment, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. For more heartwarming, soul-stirring stories like this one, true tales of resilience, compassion, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment that could change your perspective or maybe even your life. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful chapters come after the hardest storms.